Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are. I'm pleased to be here with you today. As Christine said, I'm from Eastern Canada. Um, and I see we do have participants from all over North America, and it looks like around the world. So that's really cool. Today, we're going to talk about leadership, and I want to start by thanking you for leading and teaching during so many challenging days. I've been doing leadership coaching full time for 12 years now, and it feels like the last 2 years have been the hardest 2 years for school leaders, district leaders, division leaders, and teacher leaders. Anybody working in the classroom has pivoted so many times, changed directions, figured out so many new ways of teaching. And so we've had to also figure out, as Christine said, so many ways to lead. And I know that we feel sometimes education is a little bit misunderstood. So today I hope to be able to share with you some of the leadership best practices that I've seen in schools and districts, and perhaps just have you have a few minutes to reflect on what is working well for you and maybe some ways you can build your own tools as you lead your schools and districts. It doesn't seem to matter where I've worked. I've worked in the United States almost full time for probably 10 years. And I don't know if my friends are here. I saw somebody had registered from Shelby County in Tennessee. I spent a lot of time in Memphis, spent a lot of time in the southern states, northern parts of Canada. And it doesn't seem to matter where we work. It's not about right or wrong or good or bad. It's really about school improvement. And so, as leaders in the system, it's just about getting better for students. And I can tell you, it doesn't matter where I've gone to work, teachers, principals, superintendents, division leaders, people want the best for students. They come to work every day with the best intentions. And so, we want to talk about how we get really good at high levels of learning, and we do that by leading through a lens of all students. And so we're going to look at that today. So, as I'm just kind of introducing all this work to you, I would love it if you would put in your chat in the chat box, just say hello, where you're from. Just say anything you'd like right now about your intentions for us this morning and this afternoon. Wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in, we're going to focus on leading with intention. So, talking about some key leadership areas that talk to your practice of being focused and being committed to sticking with time, focusing your time in the right areas. We're going to talk a little bit about why you should have a shared leadership model in your school or division, your district, so that you're not trying to shoulder this work by yourself. I think that's the most common coaching point I have with most principals I work with is they're trying to do a lot and they're trying to do a lot every single day. And it's really great when we can build that collaborative piece around collective efficacy and help others own that work as well. And then we're going to finish this morning, afternoon, just looking at instruction and student success. How, as a leader, do you stay focused on instruction no matter what the distractors are, especially right now, and truly be student centered? We have a lot of schools and districts with great mission statements that say something about all students or student success, but it really is about being authentic in that and modeling that student success as your journey. So we want to focus leadership on the right things for the right reasons and truly in the right ways. So we're always coming back to what should we spend our time doing? What is the right work? How do I narrow my focus as a leader so I can stay truly committed to those priorities? How easy is that for you, or how difficult does that seem to be? And so I know, as a coach with leadership in any role, it's really about coming back to that. So hopefully today we can refocus that with you just a little bit. So we're going to talk a little bit or a lot about these areas. These are key leadership areas that come up all the time in coaching. And so it doesn't matter where I am or what school I'm working with. Principals need to spend a little bit of time or a lot of time kind of rethinking these areas and helping themselves get back to just understanding which of these pieces they've strengthened or which pieces need a little bit more work. So, first, we're going to just look at intentionality and how we communicate those priorities to the people on our staff. So I wonder if you want to just take a minute, and I know that the chat box has filled up with your location. Some of you, thank you so much for letting us know. We've got people from, as Christine said, all across Canada, lots from Alberta, which I love. My sister lives in Calgary, so I see a few of you from Calgary. I see lots from New Hampshire. My cousin Sandy lives in New Hampshire, so I have connections with you as well. And really pleased to have so many principals with us today. That's great. And want you to think about, I know some of you say you're in an underperforming school, and that's all I ever work with. I start out with underperforming schools, and as Christine said, we like to turn them around. So I want you to think about this for a minute, and if you want to actually answer it in the chat as I'm talking, you can, or you can just reflect on it yourself. If you think about what would your staff say? So if I was to come to your school and we were able to poll or survey your teachers, what would they say is the most important work to you as a leader? How do they know that? How do you think they would answer that? So, what we're really asking you is, do you think your priorities are clear to others? Do you have strong conviction around what your tight expectations are, what you believe in? And are those things easily read or understood by the people who work with you? One thing we notice as leaders is that we often assume people understand the road we're on. We might assume that they're in the bus with us and on the right seats and going in the right direction, but we often have to kind of reflect on that. How are we aligning our priorities to our actions and where we spend our time? So if you're thinking about that one, I always say to my principals and district, state, provincial leaders, we kind of have to have a bit of a heart to heart with ourselves, have a little reflection on this, but truly, what are you messaging about your priorities and how consistent are you doing that? So, this is where I always ask my coaching leaders to start. And so, I would ask you to do the same. After today's over, we're finished talking. If you've got time to do a little reflection, really consider what are those messages that you've given out and how do people see your priorities right now? And maybe it's a good time to kind of reset those, being a new year and a first month in that new year. So we often go back to that simplicity. And I know Mike Schmoker talks about it. Canadian Michael Fullen has often talked about it as well, that we have to constantly simplify and clarify our priorities. So having 3 priorities versus 20, being clear on what our goals are right now, just kind of rethinking, are they student centered? Are we data driven? Are we truly impacting learning because we are focused on learning? How do we kind of keep those priorities as the main work, the right work? And so again, when you have time today or perhaps this evening, having some reflection time as a leader and thinking through where you sit right now with your priorities is always a good exercise for leadership. So we talk about it in terms of loose and tight. So do you have tight expectations that you've set up? Are there ways that you can engage your staff and others in understanding those tight expectations? So a couple examples here. Do you have collaborative teams set up? Are you working as a professional learning community or in any way that exemplifies collaboration in your building or in your division? And do you set that up with a tight expectation that it isn't a choice? So people understand that they're going to work in collaborative teams to look at student data, to build literacy skills, and to respond to student data. You've made that very clear that that's a tight expectation. Have you made it very clear that it's about student learning and that you're going to focus all PL, all your professional learning, around building some common understanding of good instruction? For example, these are tight expectations. On the loose side, of course, you can be more loose about how that happens. So maybe the teachers can figure out their own agendas they want to keep. They may have their own data protocol, and you're okay with that as long as they're doing some data analysis. You're going to differentiate your professional learning so teachers can certainly attend the sessions that are most important to them. You're going to help teachers understand how to create student ownership, but you're going to let them play with that in the classrooms and figure out what works for them. So really building your priorities out through your tight expectations and messaging those is critically important as you think about being a leader with good intentions and very intentional work. So again, you can use the chat box just to help us think about that for a minute. I know we can all learn from each other here today. You've all got great strategies that you're probably using right now to stay focused and intentional. So go ahead in the chat and just feel free to suggest something you do right now that helps you stay focused and keep to your priorities. Is there something that you could share with us that would be very helpful to somebody else here? Have you got a strategy that you've had to use, especially through COVID, that's, really helped create that for you right now, that intentional focus in your daily work? So I'm going to show you a couple templates that I'm happy to share with you after. If you'd like, we can send the PDFs to you. These are from a book called Leading with Intention that I co-authored with Jeannie Spiller. And these are just templates, I guess I'm going to say simple templates that I've given to principals and district and provincial state leaders lots of times to just kind of regroup and how they use their time and how they stay focused. So the first one I'm showing you is really about just logging your time. So taking the first column and putting in a few of your priorities that you've said are going to be your priorities. So in this example, the principal wants to do more classroom observations and spend a little bit less time in student discipline. And so those are two areas. This could be teased out to include attending collaborative team meetings, having data digs with teachers. You could list 3 or 4 things in your daily focus, and then basically you just log your time. So on the very first day, this principal spent only 48 minutes doing classroom observations, but spent 100 minutes in student discipline. And so her goal is to get that flipped. So on day 2, she works a little harder at that, and she's able to get to more classrooms and spend less time doing student discipline. So anything like this that you could print out and keep with you or use electronically that's going to help you kind of figure out where you're really spending your time is a good start in looking at your priorities. A second one that we use from Leading with Intention, again, I'm happy to share this, is basically a rubric that you can score yourself. So it's a 5-point scale. You give yourself a 1 if you totally got distracted and you didn't focus on that priority at all. And you can do all the way up to 5, which is, your actions and your messages actually align to what you said your priority was. So again, you pick 2 or 3 things that you want to focus on. This could be for a week, could be for a day, and you actually self-assess. So it's again used as a leadership reflection tool. You could also use it with a leadership team. You could use it with a collaborative team if you want to get them focused as well. But truly, when we designed this, we designed it as a leadership coaching tool for leaders to really do some self-assessment. One thing we do recognize anytime in coaching is that time is truly a struggle. And I don't think I've worked with anybody that, including myself, that ever felt there was enough time in the day to do everything that you know is a priority and that you want to touch, you want to impact. And so really being clear on your priorities and how you keep distractors out of those daily time logs and keep you kind of focused on the right work is going to help you a lot. So whatever you can do, again, to stay current in your mind, be very mindful of what your priorities are and what's coming up during the day to kind of pull you away from that. And so that's why a time log or anything like a tool like those templates can often kind of reset that for us. And so we use those tools as well as this one quite a bit. So this little tool is just one you can cut strips on and take with you into the school. You can put it on a clipboard. Very easy to use. You basically are going to write in the middle what you want to focus on, and then you actually log what happens. And I have a lot of principals who have used these over time just to kind of say to themselves, it's my reaction I have to control. What am I doing when those distractors come up? So for example, this principal filled it out. He wanted to get into Mr. Peters' language arts classroom to go see Miss Peters' small group instruction, and was hoping to do that. It was a Monday morning, I think, the day I was there with him, and he was filling this out. And right away, a teacher came into his office and asked if he had a minute to talk. So when this distractor happens, and we've all had this kind of thing a lot, we end up sitting back down, we end up back on our computer, we end up finding a resource for the teacher. So, first thing you do, I guess, is triage how important, or is it an emergency? Is it something you deal with right away? But if you don't kind of have that thought process going in your head, it's pretty easy to let the distractor become what fills your time. And so, again, just using any of these tools to kind of say, here's how I'm going to act differently. So I triage it and I decide it's not urgent. So I explain to Mr. Smith that I want to go to this class and that I'm going to see him later during his prep time. So again, I hope any of these tools are going to help you kind of think or reset that focus on being very intentional in establishing your priorities and using your time where you want to use them. I think that for me as a leader has been a hard struggle, but something that I often have to go back and kind of reflect on how I'm doing with that. So we always have to remember that we are making choices, and every choice we make becomes intentional or unintentional, and we really have to think through what it is we want to spend our time on. So let's talk for a minute about shared leadership. So that first, few minutes was really about you. And now I want you to think about within your system, how are you sharing leadership with others? So are you working to build collective efficacy? How does that play out with you and in your system? Or are you trying to shoulder all this work by yourself? And so we're trying always as leaders, and I think it's so important that we continue to build confidence. We continue to help others see their abilities to make a difference. So we know we have a significant impact on turning a school around, changing achievement, changing school culture when indeed we collectively build that capacity. And so building the confidence and the collective efficacy within our buildings makes a big difference in school improvement. So Christine mentioned at the first that it's been easy to slip back into management, and it definitely has been a year or two of managing a whole lot of practices, managing health and safety, managing different facility issues than ever before. But even while you've been doing that, if you're like any of the other leaders I've been working with, they're still really trying to focus on instruction. They're still really wanting to be focused on student learning. And so keeping that area of focus around instructional leadership versus management has been challenging, but it's still critically important. So three things that really help with that is building more shared leadership, having a leadership team, a guiding coalition, having a team of teacher leaders and others in your building that can truly share the ownership of the work. And then through that, you build these intentional conversations. So we want to collaborate, we want to learn, we want to focus on results, and we want to keep having intentional conversations. So building some kind of shared leadership model in your building where these are the conversations that you're going to have. And I know it's been difficult to not talk about protocols around COVID and spend more time around attendance and other pieces. But at the same time, we want to keep as much of a focus on student learning as we can. And then building those tight expectations that I gave you an example of a few minutes ago so that you really can focus on your priorities. So through shared leadership, we want to get these pieces to be the centerpieces, I guess I'll say, of our team meetings. And it's all for this, right? So we're trying to build teacher confidence, that self-efficacy, and we're trying to help build collective ownership. So we want teachers to embrace student learning. We want to lead it in a way that we have a shared belief in our school that we can improve student learning. These pieces do not happen overnight. They take intentional focus and they take intentional conversations. But it's so worth the work when you start to see your school improve. So we're building a bench, as I like to say, that you're successful because you are building a bench. You're not waiting for just the stars on your team to show up, but you're creating more ownership. You want everybody to understand the work, and that collective capacity is really part of that strong leadership model. So you might be the architect, you have the vision, but you need all those other people with you. You need the carpenters, the electricians, the plumbers. So you need all the other expertise around the table. And so truly that's what we want to see when we have school improvement happening, that we're building a strong leadership model. And if it's missing right now in your school or in your system, your division, I would strongly suggest you think about building a leadership team, even for the rest of this year, to start to build more capacity around the work that you're trying to do. So we're really moving away from traditional tasks where leadership teams were just the messengers. So the teachers came to a leadership team meeting to bring concerns and hear concerns from the principal, to really talking about learning, right? So we want to move over to this leadership team side where we're talking about school improvement. We're looking at instruction. We're talking about assessments and interventions. We're not just looking at budgets and orders or rubber stamping school improvement plans. We're really doing the work. So we want you to get to a leadership team that's over here, and then you're feeling much more confident that you've got a good shared leadership model that is actually going to improve your school. And why we do this, we do it for many reasons, but we definitely are doing it because we want to have more collective ownership. We want to see that facilitating change happen, right? We want to see educators engaged and having, confidence in the work and really deepen the understanding of what has to happen to improve a school. So we shift the culture from, I'm teaching to my job is to have students learn. We're shifting cultures from my students to our students. And we're shifting the cultures from just coming to work with good intentions to really having the right work happening, that we intentionally are doing the right work. And those culture shifts can happen through a lot of shared leadership and obviously through you having good, clear priorities and knowing what you want to work on. So lastly, we're just going to talk about not just, I shouldn't say, it's the big three: student-centered instruction, being really evidence-based in our thinking. So when I think about coaching, these are the areas that we come back to all the time. And these three really drive student learning and drive that instructional change. So you as a leader have to have a laser-like focus on your students and what you want your students to achieve, and you need to be instructionally focused as well. And all that should be driven by collecting data, knowing what the story is in your evidence, and definitely thinking these three through the lens of your school improvement. So I always say it as student by student, skill by skill leadership. So how do we get really good at knowing what those foundational skills are and what we want kids to know? And so when I think of the Learning Bar work and the Confident Learners Literacy Program, everything is based on foundational skills. So when I do the leadership components of that confident learners work, we're teaching the principals, we're helping the principals understand, what does good reading instruction look like? How is it that we're going to collaborate as a team around foundational skills? So we're focused on phonemes and phonemic awareness and decoding and all the pieces that really truly help you understand that student by student, skill by skill piece. So as a principal, how are you responsible for this? You're helping teachers understand the work. You have to also understand what that instruction should look like. And then how do we formatively assess it? So how do we go into a classroom and help teachers check for understanding? Where do we help them see that changes in instruction are going to be needed to change what we're doing? And then how do we progress monitor and continue to respond to that student by student data, student by student, skill by skill? So these are the pieces that really drive the work as we work both with teachers and with leaders as part of the Learning Bar work in that Confident Learners program. But any leadership coaching I do, these are the pieces that we continue to come back to. So in Confident Learners, we're trying to bridge the early literacy gaps, and we're really doing that through foundational reading skills. We're building collaborative teams focused on the evidence from those skills. And then you as leaders really truly focus on instruction. So it's like a balance of both building the teacher skills and building your skills at the same time. So you as leaders are truly engaged and invested in the school improvement work alongside, shoulder to shoulder with the teachers. And so different times we look at data in any kind of leadership coaching I do. So these are a couple examples from Confident Learners. So the students do modules, and in the beginning of the Becoming a Reader Confident Learner piece, we're looking at student data right away with benchmarks. We want to make sure we understand where the students are at to start with, and want to continue to move them along. Obviously, this continuum where they're learning their letters, they're learning decoding, they've got phonemes. So you can see we're really focused on foundational skills when we begin this work. And so we think about phonemes, not just in teaching all the phonemes, but there's a certain order and frequency that we have to think about. So a part of leadership work is making sure your teachers understand how to do progress checks. Do they have templates like this that they can really truly look at the data and understand where the students are at. So we're constantly teaching principals and teachers how to be formative in any work we do around evidence-based practice. And so we're always focused on letter checking, right? We want to become very good as teachers at those foundational skills. And so principals become well aware of what's needed as well as they go into the classroom. And we want to progress monitor data, coming in and then as we go. So we're constantly looking at benchmark assessments and interim assessments as we move students from emerging readers all the way up to hopefully to platinum and getting school improvement moving. And that's what my work's about with leadership, and definitely our work with the Learning Bar, with any Confident Learners programs that we have. One thing I love to talk to principals about, so I'm going to ask you again just to use the chat box. What do you currently focus on when you go into classrooms? So what I want you to think about is, do you have classroom observations that are very intentional? So for example, this template is one we use in the learning of literacy blocks. So in our Confident Learners program, we're teaching principals how to go in and observe the literacy blocks. So do you have currently a practice that really helps you stay intentional when you go into classrooms? Do you go in purposely looking for small group instruction? Do you purposely go in looking at a structured lesson? What do you do when you think about going to a classroom right now? Hopefully you have students in school. Some places we're working right now, they're still home virtually. But what is your strategy for staying focused as you go in and look at classroom instruction? So I'd love to see, again in the chat, if anyone has any strategies. For me, it's usually helping a principal develop a quick template that they can use, that they can kind of collect some evidence and think about some next step conversations with teachers. So I'm sure you've got better ideas or great ideas out there, so happy to see them in the chat box. So I want you to think quickly about what the responsibility of a principal is in truly being instructionally focused and staying student-centered. So when I think of it, it kind of boils down to these 5 pieces. We always want to be deepening our own understanding of what quality literacy instruction is. And I can tell you, I was never an expert in all content when I was a principal. There were classrooms I was more comfortable going in. There were teachers I was more comfortable working with. And certainly I had to learn quite a bit about what good instruction would look like, especially in early literacy. And so when I think about school improvement, it goes back to literacy for me and really deepening our own understanding of, we don't need to know everything, but we do need to understand enough about it that we can support teachers through our own observations. And so we want to continue to build your skills as principals and help you collect the evidence of that work and continue to have ongoing school data discussions. So having a discussion with a teacher that's student by student, skill by skill, you're really able to talk to them about a couple students or 5 students, or sit in a collaborative team meeting and you feel comfortable talking about the data and having them explain how they're going to set up their interventions or instruction. All those pieces will help you be more instructionally focused. So I encourage you to think about these when you do think about different ways that you as a leader can invest your own time and build a little bit more of your own capacity in terms of being an instructional leader. So when we're doing leadership coaching, we're always trying to build personal leadership skills, teach how we can build that collaborative shared leadership model, help principals develop ways to use evidence. So know the story in your student data and how you can really set some SMART goals for your kids, let your students own some of those SMART goals, and really help your teachers with that piece. We're always trying to build leadership skills around literacy instruction and help with developing that communication that's needed. So how do you as a leader help model and show what work is necessary and really communicate your expectations? And of course, last but not least is we work on parent, caregiver, and community relations. So what can we do to help you think about how to build more community ownership, how to help parents feel more comfortable, how to help parents feel part of your school and part of the work of school improvement. And so all these pieces kind of wrap themselves around what leadership coaching really is about and what our work with you should be about. So as Christine said, we're going to stop here in a couple minutes. Time for questions, definitely, and any thoughts that you might want to share in the chat. We have always want to think about what we're going to do next. So I don't think I ever leave a coaching session with a principal without that question. What will you do next? What do you want to do next? Do you want to start just by doing some personal reflection? Do you want to start by thinking about a leadership team that you should set up? Do you want to think a little bit more about what you're seeing in your classrooms or how you focus on instruction? Do you need some literacy help yourself? You know, we all have to kind of admit where our strengths are and where we need some help and where our next steps should be. But I want you to think about it in this way, that we're all fortunate that we are in positions to touch lives and truly make a difference. And so it's going with that positive intent, right? It's always going to work with knowing that we're blessed that we can be in these positions to help others. And everything you do really, truly does impact student learning. So I want to thank you for your time today. I really appreciate you joining us, and I'm happy to be here and answer any questions.
Hi, thanks, Karen. I really enjoyed that presentation. It's always very inspirational to hear you speak. And we do have a few questions from the audience here. Let me just put that here. So one of the questions that came up was, how can I personally build my practice and stay focused on my priorities?
Well, I guess I'll say you have to start with that. You have to start with the intention of being intentional, if that makes sense. One of the things that I know is true about school leaders, district leaders, provincial leaders, state leaders, is there's often a feeling of being overwhelmed. I was working in Manitoba last week with someone and also in Arkansas, and it didn't matter where I was working. The overwhelmingness of right now is taking over. And so one of the things that I often say is just get intentional about being clear on your priorities. So taking the time to actually sit down and write out 2 or 3 things that you want to work on over the next month, 2 or 3 things you want to work on over the next 2 months. When this school year ends, what is something you want to feel good about? So I guess it really is about starting somewhere and then honoring those priorities with your time, honoring those priorities with how you meet with people, what you talk about, starting to truly model and perhaps change some of the practices that do not line up to those. So it's really about getting alignment to 2 or 3 priorities with your actions, with your words, where you spend your time. That's where I'd start.
That's great. Thank you, Karen. We have a few more questions that I think we have time for a few more questions. So one of the questions is coming from, let's see, how do I become a leader of learning when I haven't had the opportunity to become a master teacher myself in the classroom?
That's a great question. Um, I would love to say every single leader I work with has been a master teacher, but that's not the way it is. We don't I was never a master teacher. I don't think we all get the luxury of becoming a master teacher before we take on leadership roles. I think what we need to do is understand teacher needs as leaders, and I think the more we understand about how we build good relationships and we build collaboration and we study together. So when I think of the term professional learning community, I think of the word professional and I think of learning. And I think one of the things we can do as leaders is learn beside a teacher. So sit down with some literacy teachers, sit down with some early literacy teachers and learn with them about the strategies they're using. Take part in professional development with them, be a student of whatever it is that is a priority for you. So if changing your reading scores in your school should be a priority, then that's where I would focus my professional development. So you don't need to be a master of everything, but you do need to understand what good instruction looks like. And we might have to study that. We might have to learn together. So it's not about you having been a master teacher as much as being willing to learn right now what you need to learn.
Yeah, absolutely, Karen. Thank you. We have a question from Kevin. I believe Kevin's from Alberta. So, what are some good ways to involve parents and/or the community? One teacher suggests an after-school program that is a homework club.
Well, definitely, there's I think more than ever, there's a need to include parents right now in our work. And it seems like with the last couple of years where parents have two things have happened, I guess. One silver lining, I'll say, of COVID is parents have had to experience having students home and in some cases being the teacher. So that can be good or bad depending on what that experience was. One thing for sure is communication with parents. I think, I've done a lot of needs assessments in schools where we actually go in and interview parents. In fact, I remember one father saying to me one time, I had no idea this is what we were supposed to be working on. Like, I didn't know this is the work my child was supposed to be doing. So I think we assume sometimes that parents do not want to help or can't help, and definitely need to know what we're about. So if it's a collaborative team that can set up a weekly communication with parents and say, these are the three letters we're working on this week. This is the sound I need you to repeat at home. I'm sending home this packet because, not just sending home the packet, but I think, there's lots of times that we forget to communicate with parents, and that's one thing I see quite a bit. So somehow building more understanding with parents of what the work is we're working on is one thing. I agree that inviting them in, whether it's after school programs where parents or community can actually see what we're doing. I worked in a school in Oregon that had a really good system of parents being able to come and observe a class if they wanted to. They just had to let the teacher know ahead of time. Anything where we can build some understanding of the work and let work go home, but let it go home in a way that parents understand it. So I see there's some suggestions also in the chat around some kits and making sure that students have work to do at home or have access to it. So that equitable lens you always have to be thinking about. And I know we've all been concerned about whether there has been equity in the last couple of years and what kids have at home to work with. So what I really want to say in general is don't give up on it. Include parents, invite them in. We used to joke when I was principal, we'd feed our parents. We'd try to host every parent thing we did with food. We would try anything we could. We would take our information sessions out to them sometimes, to community centers and different places where we knew parents were going to be. But just don't ever give up on it. The community piece and the parent piece need to be intentional, and we do um, need to have them with us. And I know that, virtually might be all that you can do with them right now, but some parents have got much better at joining chats, joining Zoom, joining FaceTime calls, being part of Facebook Live. But definitely, if you can have them in your building, I would try to think of different ways to invite them, that makes it a little bit more fun. And the food always worked for us at our school, always.
Thanks, Karen. That really is a silver lining, I think, of COVID is the ability to be able to communicate via internet, via chat, via videos like we can today. So thanks for that. There's a couple more questions here that I think we'll be able to get to before the end of the time. We're going to have a hard stop at the top of the hour. We really want to make sure that we're respecting your time today. So we have a question here from Manitoba. So when you're working with principals and superintendents who are in these roles in more remote or isolated
Mhm.
communities, Indigenous communities, what have you found to be the greatest obstacle that they need to overcome?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the greatest obstacle in the last year has been attendance and probably will continue to be this year. That we need students either face to face or at least, engaged virtually. So that has been an obstacle that is coming up more and more again. It kind of went away this fall and we were able to work on the work, but I definitely see attendance as an obstacle that we all need to, we need to put it on the table and say we got to work at it. I think that the big thing without the conditions we're working in right now, in general, the biggest obstacle is taking the time to build capacity. So helping people understand the work, not just trying to be top down and say, this is, the next shiny penny, and we're all going to try this program. So we're going to buy confident learners, and if it doesn't work in a month, we're going to throw it out and do something else. It's really about sticking with something long enough that you actually build implementation. You take the time, and I think that's an obstacle that is tough for superintendents, especially and state and provincial leaders, to stick it out long enough that you actually see school improvement happen. It doesn't happen overnight, so you got to embed the practices. And I think it's easy to give up on things when it doesn't happen fast enough. So I think an obstacle is often that we need to be progress monitoring and looking at small wins and seeing culture changes. And when we start to see those culture changes, that's when we don't give up on getting the data to change. So we have to kind of stick with it long enough. So that's definitely been an obstacle for some people.
That actually, it actually leads really well into a question that came up about this culture of acceptance. So this question, many of my staff feel like they are in a no-win situation and they accept the idea that they just can't make a difference. What would you say would be the most important piece to beginning to change that culture of acceptance?
I think that, the culture of acceptance comes when the work changes and you start to see student data change. And that's why sometimes it's hard to stick with it. I think the most success I've seen leaders have with that is when they actually notice the small changes. So then the bigger changes make sense down the road. To get that buy-in or to get that culture of acceptance, you've got to be helping people see some things in a positive way. So, when a student has learned two more phonemes, but they didn't learn five or six, that's okay. Let's look at growth. Let's notice the growth. Let's notice the changes in cultural shifts. Notice the conversations changing. Anything we can kind of grab onto. And that's why I like to see teachers and teams and you know, schools and divisions set some SMART goals, short term and long term, but some SMART goals that you can really start to see the culture of acceptance change because you can notice some small wins. I don't know if that's the right answer, but or if
No, no, that's great. And I think that those SMART goals that you talk about and really noticing the small things. I mean, my mom has a saying, "How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time." So it's just important to acknowledge those wins, especially in the environment that educators have been in the last couple of years. So there's a couple more questions here, and I think we have time for probably two or three more. So our administrators are defaulting to managerial skills and are becoming great at it because of COVID. What strategies do you consider when you want them to be supports for each other as instructional leaders?
definitely want to see them, I guess, do that instructional work. And so I would strongly recommend that that's where you start to have conversations. To get the movement back out of that management piece, we have to force the conversation sometimes. And so I really do believe that that takes intention by leaders. It takes intentional focus. You want to change a conversation. You want to have a guiding question. You want to go do a classroom observation with someone, so you force the issue. You force the conversation to change to instruction. Sometimes getting people to bring artifacts to a meeting, a show and tell kind of meeting, bringing some artifacts, asking principals to come to a principals meeting with some evidence of classroom observations or evidence of a data discussion that they had. So they had a conversation with a teacher around instruction. Anything that's going to kind of start the conversation to shift, but we as leaders have to intentionally do that. I don't think we can wait for it to happen. I think we have to just expect that on a more consistent basis. And we do have to force it by times.
Absolutely. There's lots of questions coming in, but for all of you who are putting questions out, I just want you to know that we're going to make sure that we provide a written response to anybody we didn't get to today. So can you recommend any resources for building leadership capacity for new school leaders?
Ooh, lots of them. I definitely would, I guess I'd have to recommend Leading with Intention because I
Is
co-authored
that a
that
book?
book.
Is that a book?
That's a book. And there are great leadership books, anything that is going to help you look at instruction, definitely I would look at. So anything that has something about instructional leadership. I know there's great general business leadership books that we all go to as well. When Jeannie and I wrote Leading with Intention, we wrote it with a coaching, I guess, intention that we could take it on the road with us in coaching conversations. And anything that is going to help you think about what your purpose is, what are those priorities to you, and then just teasing that out with other people. So sitting around a table with your leadership team and actually saying, what do we want to accomplish this year? It doesn't have to be much bigger than that, just to get get some thinking around vision and get some thinking around what collectively do we want to accomplish.
I've seen firsthand the work that you've done to help leaders with this type of work, and I'm just it's so exciting to kind of see things change and see things evolve when you do stay the road and you stick with it. I do have another question coming in. Just a second. Colin, you want to shoot me that question from Jonathan, please? I think Jonathan in Alberta had a question. In the meantime, I have another one here. There's a huge range of skills and abilities of the principals in my school division. So how can I balance the varying support that they need?
Yes. And that, I think for all of us, that's always a question in a big system or even a little system of, how do we differentiate? So do what are the baseline skills that you want? I guess I'd look at that first. Like what would be the the 10 leadership skills that you'd like everybody to have? And then can you differentiate who's got what? Which school leaders are really focused on shared leadership and have a good shared leadership model? Which ones are really student-centered? Do you have some principals or leaders in your system that really understand instruction? Or, could you kind of list those things out that we were talking about and then sort of triage your team, I guess I'd say, so that you can think about these are the 5 that really have not started at all. They haven't got a vision for their school. They don't have shared leadership. They haven't done any collaboration. So we're going to start with the basics there. But here's a group that already kind of have that going. And so maybe they just need more help with being data driven or student focused. So I think the thing is to have, your list of what leadership skills you really want to build in your system, and then maybe triage or identify who needs what and start to differentiate. Principals always, I think, truly appreciate it when everything isn't the same for them, that maybe there's some common professional development provided, but then there's some differentiation.
Thanks, Karen. So we have a number of different questions that are coming up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to encourage people to stay on for a couple of minutes. Put your questions in the chat box, and we'll be sure to get a sample of that out to Karen so we can get a written response for you. I do want you to know that we will be following up with an email in the next day or two that will have information about our Confident Learners literacy solution that Karen had mentioned today. Certainly, we're seeing great gains with not only school leaders, of course, but also with principals, or not principals, but teachers. We're really seeing that knowledge base expand and really seeing that change in the classroom because it all comes down to the student, which is what we always want to hold center in everything that we do. We'll also be following up with a PDF of Karen's presentation, a link to the recording, and as I mentioned, a little bit of information about our Confident Learners program as well. And a link to Karen's book, of course, too, which we'll provide. So like I said, I'll stay on the line here just to make sure that people have an opportunity to write any additional questions that they had. Sorry that we weren't able to get to everybody today, but like I said, we'll make sure that we follow up with an email. So thanks for joining us, Karen. Thank you so much for your insight and sharing your expertise today. We really appreciate you you joining us and sharing your knowledge.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right.
It's been great.
Bye, Karen. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. So I'll just stay on the line here, and thank you so much for joining us today. And I will make sure we follow up shortly with an email.